Hello, welcome to Resilience plus Rise, the space where we excavate the extraordinary from the heart of challenges. I'm your host, Thomas Scaria, and if you're feeling the pull towards a deeper purpose, a more impactful legacy beyond the peaks you have already conquered, you're in the right space. Because just like 26.2 transformative miles I explore in my book, which is out for you to pick it up. Life's most significant chapters often begins when we dare to redefine our finish line. And yes, it is this book is available to buy. Today, I have the distinct honor of hosting a true embodiment of multifaceted experience. A leader who has navigated the complexities of engineering, the discipline of athletics, the art of performance coaching, and the intricate dynamics of human development across not countries but continents. Stef Hinds or Stephen Hinds. He has got 29 years of military service as his foundation. Steph understands the very essence of teamwork, leadership, and most importantly, the power of human potential. He's a master storyteller, a servant leader, and a passionate catalyst for growth. In this podcast, get ready to be captivated by his insights, his journey, and most importantly, what I do believe an unwavering belief to make people in a better version of themselves. Welcome, Steph, to Resilience plus Rise.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for that excellent welcome. I just hope I managed to live up to half of who that guy was.
We ourselves, we are at times our worst of our critics, and when we hear somebody else talk about it, I've had amazing guests who says, "Are you sure you were talking about me?" Because it just feels kind of surreal. But then when you really look at it, yes, I've been just talking about you all. So, Steven or Steph, tell me about your journey. What has been happening, and how have you reached the space you are at this point of time?
So let's do this in reverse. So today I'm living in Germany. I'm a coach. I'm a street dog rescuer. I'm a husband. I'm a father. And my daughter is a 28-year-old doctor, veterinary doctor, just graduated last year. And my wife and I have rescued 1,500 street dogs. I run a veterans community for 44,000 people, helping them with mental health issues and social isolation. So that's who I am today, amongst other things. I have other projects.
You just 15,000 dogs.
1,500.
1,500.
I
Okay.
wanted to be 15,000.
You will.
That's
I can
part of my
already see. I can already see the grit and the determination. It will happen. And you mentioned about 44,000.
1,000 members of a veterans Facebook community that we do social isolation prevention, support with mental health, camaraderie, getting old friends together, just generally a place for them to hang out.
Wow, I'm already feeling so uplifted. I'm just, as they say, at times when you have to bask in other people's sunshine. Here I am. Please
So,
continue.
so that's where I am today. And my journey to get here went like this, this, and this. Okay,
Okay.
so there's an area in there where it's actually, ironically, although it went down, it's where all the growth and insight happened. So let me talk you through the first section. So
Sure.
I joined the Army at 16 as an apprentice tradesman. I studied electrical engineering. So I essentially went to military college for 3 years, studied electronics. That prepared me to go out into the field army, where I worked for 10 years, repairing heavy equipment like tanks and artillery pieces. At the same time, I was doing a lot of sports and adventurous training, climbing, kayaking, and those things. And the great thing with the British military is they use sports and adventure training as a way of personnel development. And if you get good at things, they put you on courses to become an instructor, and they have facilities where people can go there to take part in these activities. Well, as I progressed up that ladder, I became an instructor at one of these centers, and I continued to qualify and get more experience, grow my network until I became the chief instructor there. So I was the chief instructor there, and ultimately that process took about 10 years. So I spent 10 years, although I was in the military, I was living in the mountains of Bavaria, southern Germany on the Austrian border there, living the best life. You know, I was a ski instructor in the winter, I was a kayak instructor in the summer. You know, it was just a beautiful life. But I remember on the night that I was selected to be the chief instructor, a very old, he wasn't that old, he's probably not as old as I am now, but he was much older than I was at the time. He pulled me to one side and he said, "Hey, Stef, I'm so pleased that you got this appointment, but remember that this position will end, and I want you to be ready when it does." And something in my mind stuck. So although I was living the dream, skiing in the mountains, enjoying that, I kept up with my academic work. So I got a degree, I did my teaching qualifications, I did my German language degree because I lived in Germany. Something kept that working in the background. And then as I grew through the adventurous training world and had done all the performance coaching and was doing very well in that world, it came to a kind of an end of my soldier career. And I was having such a good life, I just didn't consider really what was going on in the future. But someone came to me one day and said, "Would you consider commissioning?" And I was like, "I had never thought of it, but is it possible?" And they said, "Yeah, you could come over into our world, which is the staff and personnel support, and we would have you as an officer in the HR role, if only you had a degree." And I was like, "I've got a degree." And they're like, "Brilliant." You know, so that piece of advice I had 10 years previously from a guy called Andrew Mabor Jones, incidentally, I'll never forget it. He said it as an off-the-cuff remark 10 years previously. 10 years later, someone went, "Oh, if only you had done this," precisely as Andrew had forecast. And I said, "I have done it." And it changed my life. It took me on to a different level. I went from staff sergeant to captain, moved into a new sphere, new experiences, new responsibilities. And that's when I went back into the main army. That's when I started going back to things like Afghanistan tours, that kind of thing. I did that for 6 years. By that time, I was 45. And then my family and I decided after 2 Afghan tours in 3 years that it was the time to stop doing that kind of lifestyle, because it wasn't fair on my wife and daughter. Because I knew when it was busy in Afghanistan, I knew when I was resting, when there was no threat. My family were 24/7 on it. They didn't know whether when the phone rang, someone knocked at the door and all that kind of thing. So we said, "Hey, it's been a great run. Let's stop." So I stopped with the army career. And it was then, so I'm now at the pinnacle of this first section of my life. And it was then that I realized that leadership is a really good place to hide. Because I went from 16 to 45 being in a position of responsibility at some stage, whereby I could always say the army's all about, you feed the horses, you feed the men, you feed yourself. That's the order of battle in leadership. So I was always looking after my team, and I was always looking after the other people. I never ever, and I never had to consider me, who I was, what my identity was. And I got really good at being the guy the army wanted me to be. That's why I progressed so far. And then one day, I'm sitting at home. I've left the career, I've left the environment, I've left the culture. We've even moved house, and I'm sitting at home in my front room. 6 weeks previously, I was Captain Hinds out in Afghanistan, moving and shaking, doing stuff. 6 weeks later, I'm sitting at home on my own, with only my own thoughts, my own memories, and my own identity, which I didn't know, didn't recognize. and I had a massive breakdown, essentially. I panicked. I felt fear. It was ironic that I felt fear in my front room, having just left Afghanistan. But it's a fear of the unknown. It's a fear of lack of control. Anyone who's been there will understand it. You know, combined between anxiety, flipping from anxiety to depression, those kind of things. So I had to re-identify myself, and I had to rebuild myself through this situation. And I was drinking a lot and trying to drown my sorrows, as it were. I ended up separating from my wife because I didn't like the person. I hated the person I'd become, and I loved my wife, and I didn't want to be that guy to her. So I literally took myself off to Bulgaria, where I wanted to have one last hurrah, have a few weeks in the ski resort, drink loads of beer, have loads of fun. And then at some stage, I was going to take my own life because I could no longer reconcile with the human being that I had become. Thankfully, I didn't do that, but I made myself very physically ill. I came back to Germany. Thankfully, Nicole took me back in. But I was so ill through alcohol poisoning, essentially, that I spent 3 weeks in hospital. And then I spent months in recovery afterwards. But it was the 16th of January, 2016, something in my head flipped where I said, this isn't the end of you. You're more than this. You've got more to offer. And that was the moment that I've gone from there, I'm down here. And that was the moment that I started on this journey here. So Nicole and I, this is an abridged version of the story. I got myself back on my feet. I realized that my struggle, if the guy who had everything and was the life and soul of the party and was, you know, crushing his career and everyone knew him, super popular, all that kind of thing, if he can have this massive breakdown, who else is out there struggling and coping just below the surface of complete collapse? And I thought, if I can use my struggles, my suffering, I can educate myself. And I did. I learned all about the psychology and how our nervous system operates and how things like imposter syndrome and how our childhood experiences shape our behaviors into adulthood. So I learned all of these things. And the beautiful thing from my suffering is, you know, and Nicole and I said we're going to give back to the world for the rest of our lives. Having seen the worst of humanity in war, we decided that the world is fundamentally a good place and we want to help the world be better. That's when we started with the dog charity, but I started getting involved with veterans. And I found that I had a unique blend of experiences and qualities where when a soldier has mental health issues and he goes to speak to a clinician, they're worlds apart. Neither can understand where the other's coming from. This is very generic, but most of the cases. And I've found myself in a situation where when a soldier comes to me to explain where their mind's at, where they've served, what they've experienced, how they're feeling about themselves, about life and everything, I have this unique ability to be able to say to them, I get you, and I've got you. And that single moment because soldiers are trained to be resilient, to be tough, show no fear, have a plan, have a direction. And when they leave the army, they lose their backup. No one's got their six. They don't know what they're doing for the next days and all that kind of thing. They feel lost and they're feeling fear because they don't realize that fear comes from a lack of control and direction. They're feeling fear. It's counterintuitive to everything they've learned. So they feel lost. And when they try and explain this to a clinician, they're making notes of symptoms and outputs and things. They're like, well, here, take this medication. Whereas I've developed, and it's not me special, I would say anyone who's been through the lived experience, we have that unique ability to say, I know why you're thinking that. I know why you're feeling that. I felt that as well. And just having that other person in the room or on a Zoom who gets where you're at, they suddenly feel that they're no longer alone. We can rekindle that esprit de corps part of the military. And we can I would argue, I've got no stats to hold this, but while soldiers and military people are waiting 9 months, 12 months to see a professional clinician, having that conversation, we call it peer-to-peer support, having that conversation with a peer who's got the most basic of training in these kind of subjects is more than enough to catch that person and stop them going further into that hole. And very often, I'd say 50, 60% of them, it's all they need is a peer to be able to say, oh, are you feeling it as well? Yes, mate, I was scared shitless. I couldn't understand that. I couldn't communicate with my wife. My kids started mistrusting me, all these things. I say, yeah, I know. That's because of this and that. And it's okay. You're normal. It's a normal reaction to a very abnormal environment where you've been brought up. And being able to have those peer-to-peer conversations has been incredibly useful. People may still need clinical treatment afterwards. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I've got nothing wrong with clinical practices or treatments. There's an
Hmm.
absolute them, but especially in the veterans community, most of what they're missing is just a buddy system, you know. And I've kind of fallen into that hole where, by my struggles, my experiences, I can offer that to people. So that's become a passion of mine to help veterans in that space. So,
Wow.
so
So,
that's where I'm back up here now. You know, so I do coaching, I help veterans, I'm rescuing street dogs, and I'm living the absolute best life. Here's a key point I must add. People say, wow, you're amazing, you're doing a great thing. I'm not a martyr. None of it is painful, none of it's difficult. I'm doing it from the heart, and I'm doing it because I love it, because I've discovered one of the things in life. Carl Jung says life begins at 40. Up until then, we're just doing research. And then you realize that the biggest thing you can find in life is that you're not the most important thing in it. And once you can have a purpose that's bigger than you will always be motivated. You will never be discouraged. You will always be satisfied and passionate till the end of your days, providing you're helping someone, something, you know, animals, whatever maybe else. So I've found my ikigai. I love it. I'm good at it. The world needs it. And I've found a way that it will pay me money as well with my coaching. So I'm the
wow.
happiest guy on the planet. I'm not a martyr. I'm not a saint. I'm doing this because I bloody love it. Okay, there you go.
Fantastic. In fact, when I'm having the conversations, I tend to say is that our purpose comes out from our deepest of pains, or the light shines the brightest from our deepest of wounds.
Mhm,
So you had mentioned that you were in three wars in your 30 plus career of
mhm,
being out in the military, and it's surprising that that turnaround came in your living room,
mhm,
and but it took through some knocks about which not you never came to a point of self-realization. It's only when you really went down at one point of time, and when you mentioned is that you were ready to take your own life, you said no, that
absolutely.
that is not what life is all about. I always believe is that life is for living, not for existing. And you pivoted to make or work towards the better good. And you mentioned a very profound statement, which I also believe is the ikigai, wherein
Yes.
once you find your purpose, your life is worth living. It becomes meaningful, it becomes a joy, it becomes something which is absolutely a sense of wonderment. So when you're going through this journey, in fact, just before we started this conversation, you were mentioning is that because of the space that you are in, people, yes, there are people who are in different spectrum of in their life,
Mhm,
professional, successful, or working towards the benchmarks. You were mentioning about a gentleman who had come to you about the challenges that was being faced.
mhm.
What do you want to say about that?
Well, there was one chap who came up on LinkedIn. He was very honest. And I actually call it courageous vulnerability because it takes vulnerability is not a weakness. Weakness is weakness. Vulnerability is being aware of the gaps in your strength and knowing when you need to ask for help. And it takes courage to be able to step up, especially if you're in a professional role or in a senior position, to say, I don't have all the answers. I need someone to help me out, you know? And this guy did that. He spoke on camera. He put a post on. And, you know, I went to him and said, here's some advice. And then I spoke from my own personal experience. I sent him some of I have a YouTube course for free, no login or anything. It's 5-day challenge, 5 days, 5 minutes to change your perspective on life and give you ideas to help keep you calmer, keep you more positive, more resilient. And I said in the video that I responded to him, I've been in 3 wars. I spent 29 years in the military. If anybody's going to know how terrible and awful the world can be, it's me. And with all of that background, I'm here to tell you that the world is fundamentally a safe and kind place. Think how many kind people you meet per week, right? You bump into someone in the shop, you know, wherever you're around, you speak to someone on the phone, you get into a Zoom call with someone. People are fundamentally kind, we're community focused, and we like to engage with people positively, right? Think about how many evil people you've met, actually eyeball to eyeball, in your entire life. I'm 58 years old, and in terms of evil people, probably on one hand, right? So just do the math on that. But the problem is, the media and the politicians understand that they can press our primeval fear buttons by telling us that the other, the unknown, focusing in on one tiny bad thing, that they can control our mind and they can make us afraid and they make us perceive the entire world as a dangerous, nasty, unfriendly place. And it's utter rubbish, right? So that's my first point. I'm telling you that from experience, having been in 3 wars. Fundamentally, I don't want to go down into the rabbit hole there, but fundamentally the world is good. The second one I said is, if and when we are asked to face these horrendous challenges that life throws at us with terminal diseases, accidents, loss of loved ones and everything, that the human spirit is such that we will rise to the occasion and we will make it through. So that's 2 things. The world is good, and even when it's bad, you will make it through. And that's the message that I carry to people, because you'll never know how resilient you are until you're tested.
Fantastic.
You know?
Wonderful. Actually, that comes to 2 points which just came to my mind. Was number one, which I tend to say time and again. I too believe in the power of community. When you turn and you mentioned about buddy system, just turning to somebody and asking, "Hey, do you want to help?" And people are shy; they don't want to show their vulnerability, that they are hurting. They
Mhm.
need somebody to talk to, and at times it becomes very difficult. But the moment they say yes, there is a statement which I say time and again, is that we all are angels with one wing. When we hold another, that's when we fly higher.
Beautiful.
So it's about that. And also another element which you mentioned is that people, again, thanks to the media, we have become such, it's become like a crutch, like a habit, whether it's a smoking or a drinking. You mentioned about alcoholic poisoning, because it became a crutch for you. Media, I mean, today the social media has become a crutch for a lot of people, but they forget that, as told so beautifully by Viktor Frankl, the space between the stimuli and the response, that's the space wherein you have got the ability to change.
You have the
And
control.
we
Yes.
have the control, and we forget it so wonderfully that it, as if it never exists. We just feel that we have to do it. Wow, that was fantastic, Steph. It was very, and guys, I will be putting out Steph's links and his channels in the comments. Do have a look onto it. Steph, now just being mindful of the time. If you have, I don't say an advice, but then if you have suggestions, you have already given two amazing thought processes as about how people can, rather than just undermining their own self, they can still work towards getting better. And there, the world is a kinder space. But you got to look, you got to see, and you got to believe. Are there any suggestions that you would tell the listeners that you've been mentioning time and again is that have got a beautiful life, but you made it happen? If they want to work towards their ikigai or their sense, what would you suggest to them?
The first thing we have to do is we have to learn to give ourselves grace. We have to be kind to ourselves. We are not victims of our past. Our past is the past for a reason. We can go into our past and we can take learnings from it. But there is nothing that happened yesterday that says by law that you have to be that same person tomorrow. You are not set in stone. My coaching program uses neuroplasticity. In 6 weeks, 7 weeks, we can literally rewire the way you think to such a level that can be measured in an MRI scan, that in 7 weeks, when you respond to a situation, you'll look at it and say, who was that guy? You will be so transformed. So the brain can be changed. Memories can be learned from. Emotional behaviors can be put to rest with the right coaching and the right therapy. So you are not the finished article. Doesn't matter if you're 30, 40, 50 years old, 70 years old, you can make a decision to change today, and you can make a change. Okay, that is your thing. And the second thing is find something that's more important than you. Once you find, and it's not, if I buy you a Ferrari today, great. Wow, that's a great car. 6 months' time, it's an insurance, financial liability. All the kids in the neighborhood have scratched it. You've realized it's absolutely useless because of the potholes in the street. You can't get the shopping in, you can't get the family in it. It's an utter waste of time and money. That's called hedonic shift. Looks shiny on day one, come day 50, you hate it. Or you need two of them, or you need the faster version to satisfy your needs. However, when I rescued my first dog, I felt tremendous joy and achievement. And it felt exactly the same when I rescued the 1500th dog. Because when your focus and purpose is outside of yourself, it never gets old. It never gets boring. There's no hedonic shift. And that's the secret to long life and continuous motivation and happiness.
Fantastic. And here, guys, it doesn't have to be dogs or animals. It can be another human, or there are children who are hurting. You can be a help to them. You
It could
can
be
be,
forestry. It could be helping, plant trees, anything like
yes,
that.
anything.
As long
And
as it's bigger than you.
fantastic. So, in this conversation, guys, what we just saw was we saw a part of Steph, and I know there are a lot more that we can uncover, but do explore in his website as well as in his channels. And in this conversation, one of the most obvious fact was his love for people, making them a better version of themselves. It was about leadership. It was also about the power of human potential. It was about the dynamics of human development and the way he's passionate. It's not only about humans, but also to dogs, canines, friends. And he walks the talk. And that's what makes a difference. That's how we reach our ikigai, finding a purpose. So, with this, Steph, I would take time to say thank you for your space and time. It was just a wonderful journey